Today, Freedom Central is in Amsterdam, chatting to Richard Dolan at the start of the Secret Space Program conference.
I thought, well, wait a minute. You know, if this is even partly true, if some of these documents are valid as it seems, why had I never read about this in any academic history book ever? How could that not be interesting? There's something going on. I call it a clandestine Cold War that's happening. So in other words, I'm absolutely convinced that the more someone watches CNN or any of these other mainstream, the less likely they are to understand the actual machinations of the world around them. The more that the world is going to seem like a big fog to them when some new event happens. Because what we've been fed 24/7 by a mainstream propaganda industry is just one lie after another after another. Nations need to understand that they are not dealing with a so-called level playing field. We're dealing with a rigged game in a lot of ways. And that is the moment in which billions of people on planet Earth are going to have a moment with themselves. And they're going to say, have I been wasting my life? Is there another way for me to create my own life, to envision how I can live as a human being? Because there are these other beings here, and they don't operate like we do. And so I think that's going to be the great wake-up call for us as a species. There's an outside world there, and a lot of people, even if they may be sympathetic, they still don't have a lot of the information available. And I feel part of my job is to give them that information, to make it very plain and clear as to why this topic matters. And it does matter.
You are a well-respected writer, researcher in the area of ufology and extraterrestrial matters, off-world affairs. What really brought you on this particular journey, communicating this information?
Well, I started this journey over 15, 16 years ago, knowing absolutely nothing about anything to do with UFOs. I stumbled across the topic at the time. I was working on a doctoral dissertation in history and Cold War studies, and they don't study flying saucers in graduate school when you're working on something like that. But I was in a bookstore, and I encountered, in fact, one of the books of one of my fellow presenters here at this conference, Timothy Good, who wrote Above Top Secret, and the subtitle was The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. And it was that book that I saw in a store. I believe it was 1994, and it just intrigued me very much. I flipped through the book. I'll never forget this. Recognizing many of the names and departments from my own study, and he was writing about them in this totally different context. You know, here is I working on the Truman administration in a very conventional Truman versus the Soviets and the birth of the CIA and the Korean War and all of this. And then here's Tim Good writing about the Truman administration in part in the context of UFOs. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You know, if this is even partly true, if some of these documents are valid as it seemed, and if there was an interest in UFOs, even if it was a mistaken interest in UFOs, I thought, why had I never read about this in any academic history book ever? How could that not be interesting? In what dimension of reality is that not interesting? So that was the initial question. And it wasn't, are UFOs real back then? I was much more conservative. I just wanted to know, is there anything to this historically? Is this part of my history? I want to know. And, of course, that snowballed into this lifelong journey that I've had ever since. The field just grabs you, sucks you in, and doesn't let you go, at least not with me. And so I ended up writing 2 volumes of history, each more than 500 pages. And I wrote a third book, which isn't history, but about the future. It's a kind of an investigation of how the world might look after the end of UFO secrecy. But I've still got the third volume of history in the works, and that will complete a 3-volume trilogy of UFOs in the modern era. So that's become my life's work.
All right. And it's been quite a challenge, I'd imagine. Do you come up against a lot of people trying to stop you or hamper your work or throw you off direction?
Yeah, I think sometimes this has happened. For a few years, in the early part of the decade of the 2004, 2005. This was shortly after I came out, not because of UFOs, but on the issue of 9/11. To my knowledge, I was certainly one of the first established UFO researchers to offer a public opinion on 9/11, which was that I argued, yes, it is an inside job, and I didn't believe the official story on that. And once I started speaking about that in conferences, I discovered that my name was flagged at every airport I flew out of. So I was never prevented from flying, but I was always delayed. So I'd go to the desk, the person, this is before the security, and the person at the desk would say, "Oh, Richard Dolan. Oh, one moment, sir." And they'd make this phone call, and I'd have to wait 15 minutes or more before they would finally let me through. And this happened multiple times within a flight. If I had a transfer, it happened again. It was like someone was out to delay or annoy me or whatever. At that time, my luggage was frequently diverted to Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., opened up, rifled through. I would get it back a day or two later. It was obvious that something was going on. I would get white vans in front of my house frequently. On one occasion, this is around the same time, 04, 05, my office is, I have a nice small little office in one part of my house, and I came into the kitchen, and my wife was in the kitchen, and she said, "You know, that white van has been in front of this house for 2 hours. That guy's been in there." Unmarked white van, this is very common. And I said, "Damn it, I'm going to go out and knock on his window right now. I want to find out who this is." So I'll never forget this. I walked out the side door of my house. The moment my foot hit the sidewalk, he just drove off. So, coincidence? I don't know. You can decide what you want. But I assume that I was being listened to. I've had a number of people with electronics expertise who are convinced that I've been bugged and so on. But I've never had a threat, an overt threat. I've never had anyone say to me directly, "Don't do what you're doing." I have had a number of insiders who have supported what I do. People who have had a great deal of information who tell me that they believe in what I do, and that other researchers, that this is important work. One thing that has become very clear to me is that within the classified world, it's not monolithic, that's for sure, and there are always people who have a different opinion. They may have taken a security oath, they may have been in the system for 20 or more years, but they may also have decided that, you know what, the secrecy on this is not necessarily the best thing for the world. And then their mission becomes to find a way safely to communicate some of what they know to outside researchers, and some of those people have come to me. And that's always a problem. My professional training is as a historian. I'm always used, and my instincts are always to use open sources for everything that I do. Anyone who reads one of my books can go through more than 1,000 citations per book and see exactly where I get what I get. The problem, though, is when you get someone who's got a long-standing clandestine career, they can't really come to you and say, "Well, you can use my name." They can't do that. They get to be at risk, and it's a difficult situation. And also, not just protecting their name, but they have to be careful about what kind of information they give, because the information itself might be traced back to them. And so it's tricky, and that makes it very unsatisfactory when, you as a researcher have to communicate or decide to communicate this to the rest of the world, because the other people listening could be skeptical, rightly so, and they'll say, "Hey, well, you're not giving up your source, so how are we really supposed to believe you?" So with that type of information, I publish only a very small amount of that. Most of what I get privately, I have to keep to myself, and I continually try to work that and find corroboration. It's difficult.
Obviously, this is such a huge field of research. When you have an audience and you giving information out to people, what is the point of focus that you go in on, the vein of attack, as to do your most effective way of waking them up?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, one of the things I always do every place I go is to assume that there are people out there who really don't know a lot about this. The one thing I don't ever want to do is to continually preach to the choir. There's an outside world there, and a lot of people, even if they may be sympathetic, they still don't have a lot of the information available. And I feel part of my job is to give them that information, to make it very plain and clear as to why this topic matters. And it does matter. Ultimately, one thing that I come back to over and over is to provide the documentation that proves, not that necessarily UFOs are ET or alien, although that's interesting and possible, but that proves But there's something traveling around the skies of this world that is not supposed to exist, and moreover, that our jets chase them. And that, to me, is a slam dunk you can take, absolutely not arguable any longer. There is an overwhelming abundance of documentation to prove that jet fighters chase UFOs. And
Wow.
anyone who doubts it can go to any number of government documents I have on my website and are available elsewhere. You can just read them, and it makes it very plain to say. Now, the question is why?
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to know? Why do we chase them? Well, a couple of reasons, I think. On the most prosaic level, let's say that you were the commander of an Air Force base, and which is restricted airspace, and these objects are seen coming over that restricted airspace. Clearly, you need to know what that is, and at some point you will scramble jets or other personnel to deal with this. So it's a security matter. And hence, the title of my 2 volumes of history is UFOs and the National Security State. In other words, not just UFOs, but it's the interaction of UFO phenomenon with the military intelligence community that I call the National Security State. So it's a military issue. It's a military issue, not just the U.S., but around the world. The other reason that these jets are scrambled is that these objects, in a number of instances, have shown that they've been able to tamper with our technology. They've disabled nuclear sites. They have been able to disable electronics equipment of our top fighter aircraft. So they have capabilities that clearly, we want to know about. But as to all of the reasons why we chase them, well, this I don't know. There's something going on. I call it a clandestine Cold War that's happening, in which you've got jet chases happening on a fairly regular basis in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and right up to our own era. This has not stopped. This is not ancient history. It's contemporary. And I'm sure the next decade we'll see yet more instances of our craft chasing these things.
At Freedom Central, we provide a platform for people who, like yourself, have a message for humanity. Many of us who are on this journey are communicating this information for a reason. What is your particular message?
Oh, wow. Well, one of them is 2 words, no fear. I think that one thing we have to keep in mind in this world is there's a lot of things to be concerned about, but we need to make our decisions based on facts, not copying and pasting the latest internet rumor that we've heard on our Facebook page. I find this is happening a lot. What we need to do is to calm down a little bit and not allow ourselves to get worked up and scared and excited over every little thing that comes up. That's an easy way to have a nervous breakdown. It's an easy way to raise your blood pressure and to die, 20 years ahead of your time. And it's not that there aren't things to be concerned about. There are. And when I say no fear, I mean that. So in other words, the 2 greatest enemies I think that we have in our era are fear and hope. Hope is kind of an odd choice. But really, let me deal with hope first. When I say it's an enemy, it's this type of hope where we say, I really want things to be better. Well, we all want things to be better. But what that means is when we're focusing on this utopian outcome that we would like, it seems to me that we're very easy to miss the on-the-ground reality that we're dealing with today. So in that sense, hope can be sort of counterproductive. But fear is worse because when we're afraid of either these other beings or the secret keepers themselves or of all the horrible environmental catastrophes that we are dealing with, we're also not seeing clearly. We need to.
This program conference.
I thought, well, wait a minute. If this is even partly true, if some of these documents are valid as it seems, why had I never read about this in any academic history book ever? How could that not be interesting? There's some. I call it a clandestine Cold War absolutely convinced that the more someone watches CNN or any of these other mainstream, the less likely they are to understand the actual machinations of the world around them. The more that the world is going to seem like a big fog for them when some new event happens. Because what we've been fed 24/7 by a mainstream propaganda industry is just one lie after another after another. Nations need to understand that they are not dealing with a
Today, Freedom Central is in Amsterdam, chatting to Richard Dolan at the start of the Secret Space